Speech by John Stuart Mill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Speech given to the House of Commons on 21 April 1868 by John Stuart Mill. It would be a great satisfaction to me if I were able to support this motion. It is always a matter of regret to me to find myself, on a public question, opposed to those who are called, sometimes by the way of honour, and sometimes in what is intended for ridicule, the philanthropists. Of all persons who take part in public affairs, they are those for whom, on the whole, I feel the greatest amount of respect, for their characteristic is, that they devote their time, their labour, and much of their money to objects purely public, with a less admixture of either personal or class selfishness than any other class of politicians whatever. On almost all the great questions, scarcely any politicians are so steady and almost uniformly to be found on the side of right, and they seldom err, but by an exaggerated application of some just and highly important principle. On the very subject that is now occupying us, we all know what signal service they have rendered. It is through their efforts that our criminal laws, which within my memory hanged people for stealing in a dwelling house to the value of 40 shillings, laws by virtue of which rows of human beings might be seen suspended in front of Newgate by those who ascended or descended Ludgate Hill, have so greatly relaxed their most revolting and most impolitic ferocity, that aggravated murder is now practically the only crime which is punished with death by any of our lawful tribunals, and we are even now deliberating whether that extreme penalty should be retained in that solitary case. This vast gain, not only to humanity, but to the ends of penal justice, we owe to the philanthropists; and if they are mistaken, as I cannot but think they are, in the present instance, it is only in not perceiving the right time and place for stopping in a career hitherto so eminently beneficial. Sir, there is a point at which, I conceive, that career ought to stop, when there has been brought home to any one, by conclusive evidence, the greatest crime known to the law, and when the attendant circumstances suggest no palliation of the guilt, no hope that the culprit may even yet not be unworthy to live among mankind, nothing to make it probable that the crime was an exception to his general character rather than a consequence of it, then I confess it appears to me that to deprive the criminal of the life of which he has proved himself to be unworthy, solemnly to blot him out from the fellowship of mankind and from the catalogue of the living, is the most appropriate, as it is certainly the most impressive, mode in which society can attach so great a crime the penal consequences which, for the security of life, it is indispensable to annex to it. I defend this penalty, when confined to atrocious cases, on the very ground on which it is commonly attacked, on that of humanity to the criminal, as beyond comparison the least cruel mode in which it is possible adequately to deter from the crime. If in our horror of inflicting death we endeavour to devise some punishment for the living criminal which shall act on the human mind with a determinate force at all comparable to that of death, we are driven to inflictions less severe indeed in appearance, and therefore less efficacious, but far more cruel in reality. Few, I think, would venture to propose as a punishment for aggravated murder less than imprisonment with hard labour for life. That is the fate to which a murderer would be consigned by the mercy which shrinks from putting him to death. But has it been sufficiently considered what sort of a mercy this is, and what kind of life it leads to him? If, indeed, the punishment is not really inflicted, if it becomes the sham which a few years ago such punishments were rapidly becoming, then indeed its adoption would be almost tantamount to giving up the attempt to repress murder, as it must be if it is to be efficacious. It will be so shocking that when the memory of the crime is no longer fresh, there will be almost insuperable difficulty in executing it. What comparison can there really be, in point of severity, between consigning a man to the short pang of a rapid death, and immuring him in a living tomb, there to linger out what may be a long life in the harshest and most monotonous toil, without any of its alleviations or rewards, debarred from all pleasant sights and sounds, and cut off from all earthly hope, except a slight mitigation of bodily restraint, or a small improvement of diet? Yet even such a lot as this, because there is no one moment at which the suffering is of terrifying intensity, and above all, because it does not contain the element, so imposing to the imagination, of the unknown, is universally reputed to be a milder punishment than death, stands in all codes as a mitigation of the capital penalty, and is thankfully accepted as such. For it is characteristic of all punishments which depend on duration for their efficacy, all, therefore, which are not corporal or pecuniary, that they are more rigorous than they seem, while it is, on the contrary, one of the strongest recommendations a punishment can have, that it should seem more rigorous than it is, for its practical power depends far less on what it is than on what it seems. There is not, I should think, any human infliction which makes an impression on the imagination so entirely out of proportion to its real severity as the punishment of death. The punishment must be mild indeed which does not add more to the sum of human misery than is necessary or directly added by the execution of a criminal. As my honourable friend the member for Northampton, Charles Gilpin, has himself remarked, the most that human laws can do to any one in the matter of death is to hasten it. The man would have died at any rate, not so very much later, and on the average, I fear, with a considerably greater amount of bodily suffering,